So I recently became a theist. I now think that there's a perfect being who created the universe. And I wrote an article about this. So I thought it would be worth for explaining for people who have followed the YouTube channel for a while how this happened and kind of what my reasons are. I won't talk about all of them because, there are a lot of different reasons that a person changes their mind. It's not just one argument, and it wasn't just one argument in my case. It was sort of holistically considering the worldviews and concluding that a theistic worldview just made a lot more sense of the world. But there were some arguments that majorly moved me. One of them was the fine-tuning argument, which everyone's very familiar with. One of them is the psychophysical harmony argument, which I've talked about elsewhere, and I'll link down below to Dustin Crummett and Brian Cutter's paper on the argument from psychophysical harmony. But the argument that moved me the most is the anthropic argument. So in this video, I'll describe, first of all, how I converted, and second of all, the argument that convinced me the most. So my conversion to theism, it wasn't anything that dramatic. It began when I was reading Andrew Chronich's book. Andrew Cronich is a Christian universalist. And sort of as I was reading it, it just kind of dawned on me, when you think about the view of ultimate reality that Andrew Cronich has, it sort of dawned on me that this actually seems like the world that a perfect being might create. And so I wasn't yet convinced, but it at least started to seem like theism was a live option, which if it better explained the facts about the world, then it would be worth accepting, rather than just a view that's completely off the table, completely not worth accepting. And so after this, I sort of started thinking about some theodicies, and I got to conclude maybe the odds of theism are around 1 in 10, where, it makes some sense of some things about the world. There are all these arguments for it that I'd heard about before, but nothing too dramatic. I actually think that was the biggest shift, because prior to that, I sort of thought that theism wasn't a live option, that it was obviously implausible. But reading Cronich's book, I just got this deep sense that this might be what reality would look like if there were a perfect being. Of course, there are still real challenges that have to be addressed. There's the problem of evil, the problem of divine hiddenness. There are these real problems, real challenges. But I think that theism started to look like much more of a live option. And then since then, it's just been essentially considering the evidence, concluding that there are a lot of independent lines of argument for theism, while against theism, there's essentially only one piece of evidence, which is evil. And while that's a really powerful piece of evidence, I don't think it's enough to overcome all of the independent lines of evidence for theism. And so I began, an analogy that I've given before that I think is a helpful one is with evolution. The thing that makes evolution make sense isn't just that there's one particular fact that it explains. So there are certain facts that are pretty good slam dunks for evolution, like the genetic tree where you can trace back through genetic differences and come up with this tree that demonstrates how similar all the things are and all these phylogenetic features and so on. But the thing that makes evolution make the most sense is just there's so many things about biology that it makes sense of. There's the famous quote that nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution. And I think that similarly, nothing in the world makes sense except in light of theism. So that made sort of theism more worth accepting. And that it's not that it explains one in particular thing super well, though there are certain things that I think are pretty near slam dunks, similar to evolution, but that the theistic picture of reality just makes a lot more sense of things in general. I'm not a Christian currently, nor am I a Jew, nor do I subscribe to any other major religion. Currently, I just think there's a perfect being who created the universe. Okay, so what were the arguments that convinced me? Well, there were some. There was the fine-tuning argument, there was the argument from psychophysical harmony, the moral knowledge argument. But the one that I'll talk about most is the one I find both most interesting and the one that moved me the most. It's an argument that my friend Amos Woolen and I have been working on called the anthropic argument. And the idea of the anthropic argument is, so it begins with the observation that you exist. Oh, shocking fact, you exist. But then we think about what are the conditions that make your existence more likely. Well, here's a thought. If there are more people that exist, it's more likely that you in particular would exist out of all of the possible people that there could be. Like, for example, suppose there were only 10 total people that existed. Well, what are the odds that you would be one of the lucky 10? The answer is very low because there are so many possible people. It's very unlikely that you in particular would exist. So this view that says more people existing makes your existence more likely, this is known as the self-indication assumption. The self-indication assumption, I think, there are very powerful arguments for it, which I'll go into one of them. But I think, the argument is it's the kind of thing where there are a lot of different arguments for it, so that I end up really confident in the self-indication assumption. So we begin with the self-indication assumption that says more people existing is more likely. And then the idea is that So it's not just like more people existing makes your existence a little bit more likely, like, okay, 1,000 times as many people makes it slightly more likely that you'd exist. It's that there are 1,000 times as many people. The idea is that it's 1,000 times as likely that you would exist, because there are 1,000 times as many opportunities for you in particular to exist. So all else equal, a theory that says that there are n times as many people predicts your existence n times as well. Okay, so the idea is the self-indication assumption's right, and the self-indication assumption says more people existing is more likely given that you exist. Well then, so imagine we're considering two theories. One theory says that an infinite number of people exist, and the other one says only a finite number of people exist. Well, on the self-indication assumption, the theory that says that an infinite number of people exist is infinitely more likely than the theory that says that only a finite number of people exist, because there are infinite times more people, and so the odds that any particular person would exist are an infinite number of times higher. So from this, we can conclude self-indication assumption gives you a reason to think that there are an infinite number of people. And not just that there are an infinite number of people. This is where it'll get slightly technical, but I don't think it's too complicated or difficult to follow. It actually turns out there are different sizes of infinity. So some infinities are bigger than others. And every infinity that's bigger than another is like infinitely bigger than the one that came before. Actually, that's not quite true, but the ones that I talk about, the Beth numbers are infinitely bigger than the ones that came before. So Beth 0 is the smallest infinity, Beth 1 is bigger than Beth 0, and Beth 2 is bigger than Beth 1. So I think, given that you exist, you should think that so it's not just enough for there to be infinite people, because remember, it's the more people that exist, the more likely that is. So how many possible people are there? Well, David Lewis proved, I think, convincingly that there are Beth 2 possible people, that there could be Beth 2 different people. Remember, Beth 0 is the smallest infinity, Beth 1 is bigger than that, and Beth 2 is bigger than that. So there are at least Beth 2 possible people. I actually think it's way, way more than Beth 2, but we can just say conservatively, let's say it's Beth 2. Well, so if that's right, that there are Beth 2 possible people, then from the fact that you exist, you get infinitely strong evidence that there are Beth 2 people that exist. After all, suppose there are only Aleph null or Beth 0 people that exist. Well, then only 0% of the total possible people exist, and so the odds that you in particular would exist are 0. So the way the argument works is you start with the observation that you exist. And then from the fact that you exist, we say with the self-indication assumption that you should think more people exist. And specifically, you should think that the number of people that exist is the most that there could be, because the probability of your existence is infinitely higher if it's the most that there could be than if it's any less great amount, like, if there are Beth 2 possible people and there are only Beth 1 actual people, then the odds are 0 that you would be one of the people that exist. So then we say there are Beth 2 possible people, and then, so the argument says, you exist. From the fact that you exist, you should think that the number of people that exist is the most that there could be. And then theism is the best explanation of why the number of people that exist is the most that there could be. Why is theism the best explanation of that fact? Well, if the number of possible people is Beth 2, it turns out that Beth 2 is a very big infinity, and it's very hard to tell a convincing naturalistic or atheistic story of why there would be Beth 2 people. Even if you think the universe is infinitely big, that would only be Beth 0 in size rather than Beth 2. So even if you think that there is an infinite multiverse or that the universe is infinitely big, it's not ultimately big enough to make your existence probable. Only a theory that says that there are Beth 2 people makes your existence probable. Okay, so then the question is, does theism make it likely that there would be Beth 2 people? Well, I think the answer is yes. First of all, if you think there's a set number of possible people, then it seems plausible that God would create them all. He would have no reason to stop after like 5 billion, because he could keep creating more, and creating a person who lives a good life is a thing of value, and so God would have an incentive to keep doing it until he creates all possible people. Now maybe you think, okay, you can't actually create all possible people because you can keep making more. Now I'm a little bit skeptical of that view, but even if you have that view, well, maybe he wouldn't be able to create all possible people, but he would still create the same cardinality of the possible people, the same cardinality of people as there are possible people. So cardinality denotes the size of infinity. So, the smallest infinity is Beth 0. Remember, Beth 1 is bigger than that, and Beth 2 is bigger than that. So if there are Beth 2 possible people, God would create at least Beth 2 actual people. Because even though he can't create every possible person, he'd be at least likely to create sort of the most number of people that there could be, given that it would be very valuable to create a huge number of people. Where, to consider an analogy, let's imagine that you're trying to write down the biggest number that you can, and you're infinitely patient and wise and can write down whatever number you want. You couldn't write down the biggest number because there is no biggest number, but you would write down a really, really big number. And if there was sort of a class of numbers that was the largest, like imagine that the largest you could write down was something like Beth 2. Well, then you would pick Beth 2 because that's the class of numbers that would be the most of. And so the argument goes, you exist from the fact that you exist. You should think that there are the most people that there could be, which is at least Beth 2 people. And then theism is the best explanation of the fact that there are at least Beth 2 people. So that's the basic layout of the argument. Now, there are a few tricky things with the argument that I think are helpful to think through. But I think there's only one really controversial part of the argument, which is the self-indication assumption. Remember, that's the thing that says that from the fact that you exist, you should think that there are more people that exist. I think that's the only thing that's really controversial. Once you have that in place, and you should think more people existing is more likely, well, theism has this plausible story about why a truly huge number of people would exist. And so as a result, I think once you have that theory, then theism starts to look really good, even if working out the details gets a little bit tricky of, okay, do you create every possible person or just some possible people? The basic point is more people existing is more likely. Theism predicts more people exist on average, and so theism gets a very, very large probabilistic boost. So that's the basic idea of the argument. So now I'm going to address one objection and then defend the self-indication assumption. And sorry if this is slightly disorganized. I'm doing this with no notes. I just wanted to be talking off the cuff, telling you kind of what I think about these things and what was responsible for me changing my mind. So the first, so a common objection people have is they say, if you're taking, infinite people, then it doesn't actually make sense to talk about creating all possible people, right? Because, you can keep making new people. So you can't create all possible people. Now, God, maybe he could create Beth 2 people, but the point is, even if he created Beth 2 people, the probability of any particular person existing would still be undefined because he could never create all of them. You can always just keep making more. And so I think this is an interesting objection, but the problem is I don't think that it engages properly with the argument. Let me make 2 points about it. The first one is people can get, I think, too hung up when thinking about the self-indication assumption on thinking about it as that, you exist, then you reason as if you're randomly drawn from the pool of possible people, but then the probability of you in particular being drawn from the pool of possible people might be undefined if it's infinite. I think that, you can get hung up on that. But the idea of the self-indication assumption, and this is what is supported by the arguments I'll give in a moment, is just more people existing is more likely. So even if on theism the probability of your existence is sort of like undefined or we don't know the probability, it's much higher than it is on naturalism because more people exist in total. Here's a helpful analogy. Suppose that we're considering, so Hilbert's Hotel, it's the idea that there's this infinitely big hotel. Okay, imagine that that Hilbert's Hotel is infinite in size. It's not just infinite in size, not just Aleph null feet across, but it's actually Beth 2. There are Beth 2 rooms in Hilbert's Hotel. So remember, Beth 2 is bigger than Beth 1, which is bigger than Beth 0. So there are Beth 2 rooms in Hilbert's Hotel. Let's say you're considering between 4 possibilities. Possibility 1 is 10 rooms get painted red. Possibility 2 is Beth 0 rooms get painted red. Possibility 3 is Beth 1 rooms get painted red. And possibility 4 is Beth 2 rooms get painted red, but not every room gets painted red. Just like, there are Beth 0 even numbers and Beth 0 odd numbers, but that doesn't mean that and there are Beth 0 total numbers, but that doesn't mean that all the numbers are even. So I would say that in a case like that, if you notice your room gets painted red, you get evidence that there are Beth 2 rooms painted red, because that makes it more likely that your room would get painted red, even if the overall probability of your room getting painted red is undefined or something like that. And working out the math in a precise way gets tricky. Then you should think that it's more likely that you in particular would exist, or that your room would get painted red if there are more total rooms that get painted red, even if you don't have some well-defined probability function over the possibilities of rooms being painted red. So that's the first point, that I don't think for the self-indication assumption, you don't need to think there are precise probabilities of events happening from the share of possible people. You just have to think that more people existing ends up being more likely. And then the second point is, if you buy this, then you'll think the probability of you existing is like undefined or 0 on every view except views on which every possible person exists. But then you should just think every possible person exists, because if your odds of existing are 0 unless every possible person exists, then you should think every possible person exists because you do exist. And then theism is the best explanation of why every possible person exists. So I don't find this objection at all convincing. And this, I think, is a broader theme where I think really to defeat the argument, you have to attack the self-indication assumption. Okay, so now the question is the self-indication assumption true? Well, I'll link some articles below defending the self-indication assumption. I think it's a really compelling view. And in fact, I'm more convinced of the self-indication assumption than I am of basically any other controversial position in all of philosophy. And I think that the evidence for the self-indication assumption is several converging lines of very convincing arguments, and that there are no good arguments in response, where, there are all sorts of arguments that people raise, but I don't think any of them are convincing. I'll link articles addressing most of them. So, okay, why accept the self-indication assumption? Well, I think the main reason to accept the self-indication assumption is that if you don't accept the self-indication assumption, you get this very strange result where you either violate probabilistic reasoning in a standard way, or you can predict events in advance. So here's an analogy. Suppose there's one person who gets created. They flip a coin. If the coin comes up heads, then 100 people then 99 people get created. And if it comes up tails, 0 other people get created. Okay? And all the people get created in their own rooms, and they don't know if they're the first person. Okay, so imagine you deny the self-indication assumption. You think more people existing isn't more likely. So when you get created, you should think the odds that the coin is such as to come up heads is equal to the odds that the coin is such as to come up tails. And I know phrasing it is such as to come up is a confusing way of phrasing it. The reason I phrase it that way is that, remember, you don't know if you're the first person or one of the later people. So you don't know if this is going to happen in the future or if it has already happened. So I'm using is such as to happen to describe that what the coin's outcome will be, even though you don't know whether it'll be in the past or the future. So it is a confusing way of phrasing it, but it's the only way of doing it. It's I think the neatest way of doing it, where that conveys that you don't know if it has happened or if it will happen. If I said, for example, you have 50% credence in that the coin will come up heads, then that implies that it's the future. But you don't know if it's the past or the future. Okay, so you have a 50% credence in the coin being such as to come up heads, and 50% on it being such as to come up tails. But you reason in the following way. And you're 50-50 because you think, the odds that it would come up heads are equal to the odds that it would come up tails. The only difference between the hypotheses is that one predicts more people. And so, as a result, I should be indifferent because, more people existing isn't more likely. But you reason in the following way. You say, let's imagine that the coin comes up, is such as to come up heads. Well, I could be the first person, but I could also be the second one or the third one or the fourth one or the fifth one or the sixth one or the seventh one, etc. And so if the coin comes up heads, the odds that I'm the first person are not 0%, are 1%, because I could be any of the 100 people. Or sorry, not 1%, 0.5%, because, you start with, I'm explaining this poorly. If the coin comes up heads, the odds you're the first person is 1%. So the overall odds that the coin came up heads and you're the first person is 0.5%, because there's a 50% chance that the coin is such as to come up heads. In contrast, if the coin is such as to come up tails, then there's only one person in total, so you're guaranteed to be the first person. So you reason, if the coin is such as to come up heads, the odds are only 1 in 100 that I'd be the first person. Well, if the coin is such as to come up tails, the odds are 100% that I'd be the first person. So now, suppose you find out that you're the first person. Well, now you're very confident that the coin is such as to come up tails, because then it makes it 100 times as likely that you would be the first person. But now you think that the odds that the coin will come up tails are 100 times the odds that the coin will come up heads, even though you haven't flipped the coin yet. That seems really weird. It seems like you should not be able to predict the results of a coin flip in advance if you have no evidence about what the coin flip will be. And here's a principle that can help illustrate why this is the case. If there's some chance event, like a coin flip, and the only differences between the outcomes of the events will be what will happen in the future. So, for example, you're flipping a coin, and if it comes up heads, there will be an explosion in the future. Then your credence in the coin coming up heads should be 0.5. Because sometimes your credence in a coin that hasn't been flipped yet coming up heads should be more than 0.5 if you already have evidence that it'll turn out some way. So if an oracle tells you that it'll come up heads, then you should expect that the coin will come up heads. But if the only differences will be in the future, then you shouldn't predict in advance the outcome of the coin flip. So the idea is that if you upon finding out that you're the first person, you get evidence that's 100 times as strongly predicted on the tails hypothesis than on the heads hypothesis. So now you have 100 to 1 odds that the coin will come up tails, even though the coin hasn't been flipped yet, and that's very weird. And you can make other cases that are sort of like this along similar lines. Now, here is by making the numbers bigger, you can get it so that you'll predict that you'll get a royal flush in advance in poker, for example. Or that Adam and Eve, if they didn't know they were the first people and then they find out that they're the first people, that's much more strongly predicted on the hypothesis that reality in total will only have 2 people. So now Adam and Eve would get very strong evidence that they won't have any offspring, and then they could, like, for example, be confident that if they have sex, Eve would not get pregnant. And yet it does not seem like that's a safe kind of birth control, to use an example that Nick Bostrom has given in a paper. Now, maybe what your thought is that, okay, you start out 50-50, but upon finding out that it's the first day, then you go back to 50-50 for some reason. But the problem is that just violates probabilistic reasoning, where if you start out 50-50 between 2 hypotheses, and then you observe a piece of evidence that's 100 times as strongly predicted on one hypothesis than on another, then you should ultimately end up thinking that the hypothesis that predicts the evidence 100 times as well is 100 times as likely. And so similarly, if the hypothesis that the coin is such as to come up tails predicts you being the first person with 100 times the probability as the hypothesis that the coin is such as to come up heads, then you should have a credence of 100 to 1 that the coin is such as to come up tails. So then you get this result that you can predict the results of a coin flip in advance that hasn't been flipped yet, even if the only differences between its potential effects are in terms of what will happen in the future. So why is this a powerful argument? I think it's a powerful argument for a few different reasons. The first one is I think it appeals to only one philosophically controversial premise, namely the self-indication assumption. While with the Kalam, for example, if you deny the first premise, if you think there's an infinite regress, if you're a B theorist, there are a lot of different ways of getting out of the Kalam. While with this one, I think that while there are a few different moving parts to the argument, once you have the self-indication assumption in place, all of the rest of the argument is sort of very easy to put in place, where maybe you object to one premise, you can supplant it with another similar premise, but kind of once you have the self-indication assumption, everything works kind of neatly and neatly falls into place. So I think that's a first thing that's interesting and convincing and powerful about the argument. The second thing that I think is interesting and convincing and powerful about the argument is that I think it can help work against the various alternatives to theism. So there are different alternatives to a perfect being. One alternative to a perfect being you might have is you might think there's just a limited designer, a being of limited power and goodness who sort of wants to create a world but is not powerful enough to create a perfect world. And you might think that has the advantage of explaining why there's evil and explaining various other features of the world. And I think it does. I think it does have a certain nice bit of explanatory power. I think the problem with such an account is that it doesn't explain all the evidence. And this is one piece of evidence that it really doesn't explain. Because for it to explain the anthropic evidence, the being has to be powerful enough to create all possible people. But if a being is powerful enough to create all possible people, you would expect it to be powerful enough to rid the world of various evils. So I think that's a second advantage of the argument. And similarly, there are other hypotheses like that nature is sort of oriented towards bringing about good things, and that can help explain other good things in the world that theism is argued to be an explanation of. But unless it has this really strong proclivity, then it's hard to see how you get every possible person. And if it does, then the problem of evil just re-arises. If you say that there's an infinitely strong force that just brings about the best possible thing, then it's very difficult to see why there's so much evil in the world, why so much in the world goes wrong in these horrible and disastrous ways. The third advantage of the argument is that if the self-indication assumption is right, it's very, very strong evidence. So on theism, the odds that every possible person would exist, I think, are quite high. I'd say the odds that either every possible person would exist or that the number of people that exist is the same as the most number of people that there could be. So if there are best 2 possible people, there are also best 2 actual people. I think that the probability of that on theism is very high. I think the probability of that on theism is maybe 90%. In contrast, on atheism, the probability of that is very near 0. Think about just what you would expect if you're an atheist. You find out there's no God. Would you expect every possible person to exist? No, of course not. It's very difficult to see a picture of how every possible person exists. To the best of my knowledge, there are only 2 atheistic alternatives to theism that predict the existence of every possible person. And those are David Lewis's modal realism, where he says every possible world exists, and Max Tegmark's view, where he says every possible mathematical structure is instantiated. And with Tegmark's view, it's not even clear that it gets you enough people, depending on exactly what you count as a mathematical structure and the cardinality of that. But the problem is with Lewis's view that it undermines induction, because if every possible world exists, then the vast majority of people that have had my experiences up until this point will have their experiences catastrophically collapse 1 second from now. They'll, have, for every world where things continue as normal, there are an infinite number of worlds where things, where everything turns into a leopard or a dinosaur or a thing of grass or something, or, the laws of physics change radically. There are an infinite number of ways that the world could change in ways that make the future not resemble the past. And so if you think modal realism's right, then I think you can't trust induction. And I think modal realism has certain other problems. Maybe it has some moral problems where it makes it so that you oughtn't do good things. Maybe there are problems with it explaining modality. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but I basically think that there are a few theories on atheism that predict every possible person exists. But those theories are all both, one, very improbable, and two, even aside from the fact that they're extremely improbable, they have this other problem, which is that they end up jeopardizing induction. And Tegmark's view also jeopardizes induction for exactly the same reason. So as a result, it's this, you get evidence for this fact about the world, which is that every possible person exists. And then you get very, very strong evidence from that fact to the existence of theism. So I think it's a very convincing argument. And then fourth and finally, I think it's much more immune, or maybe this was fifth, I don't know, I think fourth, this is much more immune to the kind of counter-arguments that naturalists like to make. So, for example, in response to the fine-tuning argument, naturalists can appeal to a multiverse. Now, I don't actually think that's an adequate solution, and I have for people curious, I'll link an article below where I present the fine-tuning argument and argue that the multiverse is not a satisfactory explanation. But so I think with a multiverse, it's not able to explain the anthropic data, because even if you think there are infinite people, you need at least best 2 people in order to make a person's existence remotely likely. So as a result, from the fact that you exist, there are not obvious naturalistic alternatives to how you explain it. So you have this piece of data that is very predicted on theism, very surprising on naturalism, and there are not plausible alternative naturalistic stories that make that likely. So this feature of the world, it's been one of the things that was responsible for my move towards theism. So there are a lot of weird things about the world if you're a theist, things that are puzzling. For example, it's puzzling that there's so much evil in the world. It's puzzling how God's relationship to time works. How do you exist timelessly and enter into time? That's all very mysterious. It does not make much sense to me. But on naturalism, there are an equal number of mysteries, and I think much greater mysteries. You wouldn't necessarily expect to be informed about how it works when a being is timeless and enters into time or remains timeless or something like that. That's all very weird stuff that human brains are not fit to comprehend. In contrast, I think on naturalism, we just have this much more straightforward piece of data where it's very hard to see how you get best 2 possible people. And I don't know of anyone, and this is a strong statement, but it's one I'll make, I don't know of anyone who's proposed a remotely plausible model of reality on which every possible person exists if there is no God. So I think this ends up being a very convincing argument for theism. It's the argument that I think personally moves me the most. There are other arguments that move me a lot, like psychophysical harmony and theism. And it's one of the things that was very responsible for my move from atheism to theism. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope the argument that I describe was interesting. Hopefully my explanation was clear. I know it's a little bit of a complicated argument, and I hope that doesn't dissuade people from reading about it, because I think it is a really powerful argument, and it helps you sort of see this very grand picture of what ultimate reality looks like on theism, and provides great evidential support for theism. So yeah, thanks for watching.